How much was taken?
Millions.
5, 10.
I'm about to go to court, so I'm saying I don't want to disclose it.
Okay.
Millions. There's millions lost.
Omi Ina Hellcat.
How much was taken? Millions. 5, 10. I'm not even trying to disclose the exact number. But yeah, millions were lost. And the moment he stepped out after prison in January 2026, the internet did what it always does. It started talking like the story was already written. That Omi Ina Hellcat was about to run it back to 100 million. Not for the first time, but the second. After the federal government already stripped roughly 30 million in assets, after they auctioned off 57 cars, after 62 federal counts, and a potential sentence that could have stacked up to more than 500 years on paper. Let that sink in. Not that anyone was actually getting 500 years, but that's the kind of number they put on the board when they want you to understand the weight of what you're facing. The Lamborghinis, gone. McLarens, gone. Bentleys and Porsches, gone. Even the Power Rangers wrapped Lumbo, gone. The mansion once tied to a Philadelphia baseball star, gone. Around 6 million in cash, gone. And still, when he walked out, cameras rolling, greeted by people waiting for him, the question wasn't whether he was finished. It was how fast he could get back to 100 million. That's the kind of story you don't just stumble into. That's the kind of story people turn into movies. But to understand how that conversation even exists, you have to go back to where it all started. And the gap between those two worlds is the entire point. Bill Omar Carrasquillo was born on September 6, 1986, in North Philadelphia. From the beginning, life wasn't gentle. His mother, Soledad Diaz, struggled with addiction and died from an overdose while he was still a child. His father, Julio Carrasquillo, was involved in the drug trade and, by multiple accounts that surfaced later, even taught him how to cook crack cocaine when he was just 12 years old. 12 years old. While other kids were thinking about school or games, he was being introduced to the mechanics of the drug economy on a kitchen stove. There was no stability either. He bounced between relatives, foster care, and unstable homes. At one point, he's even described being placed in a mental health institution under circumstances that later raised serious questions, with claims that his situation was exploited for prescription drugs. Whether every detail is interpreted the same way or not, the picture that forms is consistent. A childhood with no safety net, no consistency, and no protection. In places like North Philadelphia, especially in the 80s and 90s, opportunity wasn't just limited, it was often absent. Factories were gone, jobs were gone, and what replaced them wasn't stability, it was survival economies. For a kid growing up in that environment, the streets weren't an alternative path. They were the default one. So by his teens, he was in it. Fully in it. The drug trade wasn't a phase. It became a decade-long cycle that followed him into adulthood. Arrests, setbacks, repetition. The kind of loop that swallows most people whole. But even inside that environment, something stood out about him. Not the circumstances, but the mindset. He was always looking for leverage. Always looking for the angle. That instinct, to find what others miss, to exploit gaps in systems, that would define everything that came later. Eventually, in his late 20s, he made a decision that most people in that world never fully managed to make. He walked away from the drug game. No degree, no connections, no real safety net waiting for him. Just the same instincts, now pointed at survival in a different way. But walking away from one hustle didn't mean walking into legitimacy. It just meant the next opportunity would come from somewhere else. Around 2016, he found it in something most people didn't even understand yet. IPTV, internet-based television streaming. Instead of cable running through wires controlled by companies like Comcast or Verizon, IPTV delivers channels over the internet. And once that content exists digitally, it can be manipulated, rebroadcast, and redistributed. That's where the loophole appeared. The system he and his partners built worked like this. They took legitimate subscriptions to services like cable and premium channels, then used specialized encoders, hardware reportedly sourced from overseas, to strip protections from those streams. Once unlocked, they could rebroadcast the content over the internet to thousands of paying users. And the price was the hook. Around $15 a month. For what normally cost 10 times that through legitimate providers. That gap created the explosion. People weren't downloading files. They were subscribing to what looked and felt like a real service. A channel guide. A remote. A smooth interface. It mimicked legitimate cable so well that most users didn't even think of it as piracy. The operation scaled fast. Word of mouth did the rest. Barbershops, friends, neighborhoods. It spread like any other subscription service would. At its peak, the operation known as Gears TV reportedly reached over 100,000 subscribers and generated around $34 million in revenue. For federal investigators, that wasn't just big. It was unprecedented for a copyright case of this kind. One Department of Justice attorney later noted he'd rarely seen anything on that scale in piracy prosecutions. And that's where the contradiction begins. Because on paper, this looks like a criminal enterprise. But structurally, it also looks like a startup that figured out distribution, pricing, and scale better than its entire industry, just operating on stolen infrastructure. The money didn't just sit there either. It moved into real estate, nightlife, construction, and a growing portfolio of businesses that blurred the line between reinvestment and exposure. Then came the part that changed everything. He didn't stay quiet. He built a brand. Under the name Omi Ina Hellcat, he launched a YouTube channel and started showing everything. The cars, the houses, the jewelry, the lifestyle, the entire come-up, documented in real time. The channel exploded, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, tens of millions of views. To viewers, he wasn't just a businessman. He was proof that someone from nothing could break out completely. But what built the audience also built the case file. Every video became documentation. Every flex became evidence. The same content that turned him into a cultural figure also mapped out his assets, lifestyle, and timeline with precision investigators would normally have to spend years reconstructing. By 2019, federal agents were watching closely. Then came the raid in November 2019. Early morning, Thanksgiving week approaching. Federal agents entered his Swedesboro home and began seizing everything. Cars, cash, electronics, equipment. Dozens of vehicles were towed away. Millions in assets were taken. And in real time, he went live, broadcasting the raid as it happened. It was the final extension of a life lived entirely in public. The investigation didn't end there. It was only the beginning of the legal process. Years later, in September 2021, a 62-count federal indictment was unsealed. Wire fraud, copyright infringement, money laundering, tax evasion. The full structure of the case laid out in detail. On paper, the exposure was massive. A theoretical maximum sentence exceeding 500 years, not as a realistic outcome, but as leverage, pressure designed to define the seriousness of the charges. After years of legal back and forth, he eventually pleaded guilty in February 2022. A strategic decision in a system where trials rarely favor defendants in complex federal financial cases backed by extensive digital evidence. By March 2023, sentencing was finalized, 66 months in federal prison, roughly 5.5 years, along with asset forfeiture exceeding $30 million, plus millions more in restitution and back taxes. And just like that, the empire that once filled YouTube feeds was dismantled piece by piece. Cars auctioned, jewelry sold, properties liquidated. What remained was the sentence. But even that didn't fully define the outcome, because federal time works differently than most people assume. With credits and time served, he ultimately ended up serving closer to 3 years before being released in January 2026. When he walked out, the internet picked up the story instantly. Clips circulated. Reactions flooded in. The same cycle continued. Only now the question wasn't about how he built it the first time. It was whether he could build anything again. Because now he's out on supervised release. Every move monitored. Every dollar traceable. No shortcuts. No loopholes. No gray areas. The same mindset that built everything before is now confined inside strict legal boundaries. And that's where the real tension sits. Because the first time, he built from nothing. No audience. No legitimacy. No platform. This time, he walks out with a name, a following, and a story already known across the internet. Which raises the only question that actually matters now. Can a man who built his entire life by finding gaps in broken systems learn how to win in a system that doesn't allow gaps at all? That's the comeback everyone is watching. That's the bet. And that's where I want to hear from you. Is Bill Omar Carrasquillo someone who finally turns the page and builds it clean this time? Or is the cycle already written? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you're subscribed, because the next story goes just as deep. How much was taken? Millions. 5, 10. I'm not even trying to give an exact number here. But what's clear is this. Millions were lost, and when he walked out of prison in January 2026, the internet immediately started doing what it always does. It started writing the ending before the story even had time to breathe. Omi Ina Hellcat was coming home, and the first thing people were saying wasn't what now. It was he's about to do it again. The same number started circulating everywhere, 100 million. Not for the first time in his life, but supposedly the second. This is after the federal government already stripped around 30 million in assets. After they seized and auctioned off 57 cars. After 62 federal counts were stacked against him. After a theoretical exposure that, on paper, reached over 500 years in federal prison. And that number, 500 years, it was never realistic in the literal sense. But in federal court, those numbers aren't about reality. They're about pressure. They're about making sure you understand exactly how serious the government is taking the case. The Lamborghinis were gone. The McLarens were gone. Bentleys, Porsches, all of it stripped away. Even the Power Rangers wrapped Lamborghini that had become part of his identity online, gone. The mansion tied to a former Philadelphia sports star, gone. Around 6 million in cash, gone. And yet, when he walked out in 2026, greeted by people waiting for him, cameras rolling again, the question wasn't whether he was finished. It was how fast he could get back to 100 million. That's not a normal story. That's not an everyday comeback. That's the kind of narrative that gets turned into documentaries before the second chapter even begins. But none of that makes sense unless you understand where it started. Because the distance between that first moment and this one is the entire story. Bill Omar Carrasquillo was born on September 6, 1986, in North Philadelphia. And from the beginning, life didn't offer him anything stable to stand on. His mother, Soledad Diaz, struggled with addiction and eventually died from an overdose while he was still a child. That alone reshapes a childhood. But it didn't stop there. His father, Julio Carrasquillo, was involved in the drug trade, and according to accounts that later surfaced through reporting and court discussions, he even introduced Omi to cooking crack cocaine when he was just 12 years old. 12 years old is the part that doesn't really sit right when you hear it the first time. Because at that age, most kids are still trying to figure out school, friends, games, basic life structure. In his case, he was being introduced to the mechanics of an underground economy inside a kitchen. And the instability didn't stop at home. It spread everywhere. He moved between relatives. He moved through foster care. There was no consistent environment, no single place that felt like home for long. Even at one point, he was reportedly placed in a mental health institution under circumstances that later raised questions, including claims that his situation was taken advantage of for access to medication. Whether every detail is told the same way by everyone involved or not, the larger picture doesn't change. This was a childhood built on instability, survival, and constant movement through systems that were supposed to protect him but didn't. North Philadelphia in the late 80s and 90s wasn't a place with a lot of escape routes. Factories had closed. Jobs had left. Investment wasn't coming back. And when legitimate opportunity disappears from a neighborhood, something else always fills the space. For him, that something else became the streets. So by his teenage years, he was fully inside that world. Not flirting with it, not observing it, living it. The drug trade became routine. It stretched across years. Then more years. Arrests, releases, cycles repeating. The kind of loop that most people don't exit cleanly, if they exit at all. But even inside that environment, there was something different about how he operated. He wasn't just participating. He was analyzing. Always scanning for leverage. Always thinking about how to turn something small into something scalable. That mindset would later define everything he touched. At some point in his late 20s, he made a shift that most people in that position struggle to make at all. He walked away from the drug game. No backup plan. No degree. No formal path waiting for him. Just a decision to step out of one economy and try to survive in another. But leaving one world didn't automatically place him into a better one. It just left him searching. And that search eventually led him into something most people at the time barely understood: IPTV, internet-based television streaming. At its simplest level, television used to travel through cable lines controlled by major providers. You paid them, they controlled what you could watch, and everything was locked behind subscription systems. IPTV changed the direction of that flow. Instead of cable dictating what came into your home, content could be delivered through the internet. And once content exists as a digital stream, it becomes flexible. It can be copied. It can be redirected. It can be rebroadcast. That's where the opportunity and the problem emerged. The system he helped build worked in a very specific way. Legitimate subscriptions to services like cable and premium networks were purchased. Then specialized encoder hardware, reportedly sourced internationally, was used to strip protective layers from those streams. Once unlocked, those channels could be redistributed online to paying customers. From the outside, it didn't even look like piracy. That's the important part. It looked like cable. It felt like cable. It behaved like cable. Except the price wasn't cable. Around $15 a month. For hundreds of channels. Premium content. Sports. Movies. Everything. That price difference did the rest. Because in reality, most people aren't making ethical decisions about infrastructure. They're making financial decisions about bills. And when someone offers the same experience for a fraction of the cost, adoption doesn't need advertising. It needs word of mouth. And it spread exactly like that. Quietly at first, then fast, then everywhere. The operation scaled under names like Gears TV and Gears Reloaded. It wasn't just software either. It included hardware, modified streaming devices, customer support systems, payment structures, the full infrastructure of a real business, just operating in a legally broken space. At its peak, the system reportedly reached over 100,000 subscribers and generated around $34 million in revenue. That number changed everything. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a hustle. It was a large-scale enterprise. And it had caught the attention of people who deal specifically with dismantling enterprises like that. Federal investigators later described it as one of the largest piracy cases they had ever worked on at that level. And this is where the story shifts again. Because while all of that was happening, he didn't stay hidden. He didn't stay quiet. He built a public identity. Under the name Omi Ina Hellcat, he launched a YouTube channel and started showing everything. Cars, jewelry, houses, cash. His entire lifestyle turned into content. The channel grew fast, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, tens of millions of views. Eventually surpassing 800,000 subscribers and building a massive audience that wasn't just watching, but emotionally invested. Because to a lot of people, he wasn't just a businessman. He was proof of something bigger. A narrative that someone from nothing could break out completely, without permission, without traditional systems, without waiting. But there's a hidden cost to living like that in public. Every video is a timestamp. Every flex is a record. Every explanation of how you got rich becomes a roadmap of your life at its most vulnerable point. And by the time federal agents started building their case, they didn't need to guess what his life looked like. He had already shown them. The raid came in November 2019. Early morning, just before Thanksgiving. Federal agents entered his home in Swedesboro, New Jersey, and began the process of dismantling everything. Hours of searching, seizures of property, cars being towed, equipment being removed, cash, electronics, assets, all taken. And while it was happening, he went live. He streamed his own raid in real time. That moment alone tells you everything about how intertwined his life had become with performance and audience. Even in crisis, the instinct was still to document. But the raid wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the legal process. 2 years later, in September 2021, a 62-count federal indictment was unsealed. Copyright infringement, wire fraud, money laundering, tax violations. The full structure of the case laid out across dozens of charges. On paper, the maximum exposure exceeded 500 years in prison. Not because anyone expected that sentence, but because that's how federal stacking works when every violation is counted individually. It creates pressure. It creates leverage. It defines the seriousness of what's in front of you. And it wasn't just him. His partners were included in the case too. The entire structure was under scrutiny. At first, he pushed back. Publicly. He gave interviews. He talked about loopholes. He acknowledged he operated in gray areas, but framed it as finding opportunities in systems others ignored. He even pointed at others doing similar things who hadn't been caught. But over time, the reality of the federal system becomes harder to ignore. These cases aren't built quickly. They're built over years. And when they're ready, they're already complete. In February 2022, he pleaded guilty. That decision changed everything. Because in federal court, pleading guilty isn't just an admission, it's a calculation. A recognition that the evidence is strong enough that trial isn't a gamble, it's a risk of maximum exposure. By March 2023, sentencing was finalized. 66 months in federal prison. Around 5.5 years. Plus supervised release. Plus asset forfeiture exceeding $30 million. Plus restitution and tax obligations reaching into the tens of millions overall. And just like that, everything built over years was dismantled on paper and in reality. Cars auctioned. Jewelry sold. Properties liquidated. The entire visual identity of his success broken apart and redistributed. But even the sentence didn't fully play out as written. With credits and time served, he ultimately served closer to 3 years before being released in January 2026. And when he walked out, the internet picked up exactly where it left off. Clips went viral. Reactions flooded in. And the same question returned immediately. Not what happened, but what happens next. Because now he's on supervised release. Every financial move monitored. Every decision visible to the system. No gray areas. No loopholes. No shortcuts. Which creates the real tension in this entire story. Because the first time, everything was built from nothing. No audience. No reputation. No leverage. This time, he walks out with something he didn't have before. Attention, recognition, and a story the entire internet already knows. And that brings everything down to a single question. Can someone who built everything by finding gaps in broken systems learn how to succeed in a system that doesn't allow gaps at all? That's the comeback everyone is watching. And that's the story still unfolding.